Our next speaker is Richard Leventhal. Richard Leventhal is director of the Penn Cultural Heritage Center and professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Pennsylvania. Serves as the curator of the American section of the University of Pennsylvania's Museum of Archaeology. He's director of the Castwar and Tejosuco, which is a community heritage project in the Yucatan region of Mexico. And among his publications is a forthcoming book, H.B. Nicholson, Creating the Foundation for Mesoamerican Studies, that's in press at the University of Colorado Press. Thank you, Richard.
Is there a pointer? Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for taking the time to listen to some of the things I want to talk about today. This is a community development project located in the Yucatan. And in fact, you see the names of three of my co-investigators, people who are working with me on this project. Carlos Chan Espinosa, who is the director of the Castwar Museum in Tejosuco, Eladio Mupat, who is a member of the Tejosuco community, and Demetrio Put Cahun, who is the head of the Ejido of Tejosuco. And these people are very much part of this project. In fact, they are the leaders of the project. I am just following along. I am here because I speak English and they don't. In Mexico, they would be giving this talk. Oop, what did I just do? Sorry. Is it this button? That button, gotcha, sorry. So what I will be talking about today will be about landscapes of violence, landscapes of contention, and landscapes of memory, all wrapped up around Tejosuco and around this area within the states of Quintana Roo and the Yucatan. The other thing that I want to bring up in some sense question will be the constructs of outstanding universal value. Because when we begin to think about the preservation of the heritage of Maya people, the people who are alive today in this region, we tend to think about the preservation of the ancient Maya. So whether it's Tikal on the right or Palenque on the left, these are the types of things that we see as the heritage of the Maya people. At the same time, as you go down into that region as a tourist, you begin to see representations of these pyramids, representations of Maya people such as this on the left, located outside the city of Chetumal. And this is what the tourists are seeing. Or they're seeing these types of murals in tourist communities, again, representing to what we think the Maya heritage really is. Very clearly, everybody in the Yucatan acknowledges the incredible economic importance of Maya heritage. At a place like Chichen Itza, where you get upwards of 1.5 million tourists a year coming into this region to visit this ancient site. This is an economic boon for the region, and people acknowledge that, and they, in some sense, feel that this is a critical element within this region. At the same time, however, the Maya people in this region do not see the ancient Maya as an integral part of their immediate heritage. The ancient Maya are, in some sense, too far into the past. And what the Maya see, particularly in the community that I'm working in, is something much more recent in terms of their heritage. And this is, in fact, the caste war of the Yucatan that ran between 1847 and 1901, and in many respects continues today. The town of Tejosuco that I work in is considered to be a rebellious community today. They have physically kicked out representatives of the Institute of Anthropology. They have kicked out other representatives of the federal government from their community and simply saying, we don't want you here. On the left, you can see that as you drive into one of the towns, there is a monument to the martyrs of the Maya Social War of 1847. And then on the right, one of my favorite murals that talks about the fact that the Maya region is not an ethnographic museum. It is a community on the move, moving forward. This is the way they see their community, not as something stagnant, not as something about the ancient world that we see as outsiders. And so what we have started is a caste war community project in Tejosuco and Quintana Roo, located within the central part of the Yucatan Peninsula. One piece of this is, in fact, In 1850, there was an apparition of a talking cross that in fact led the armies of the Maya people forward to continue the rebellion against Mexico. And the talking cross, the shrine exists today that you can see on the left, and on the right you can see the altar. The actual talking cross, I don't know where it is. It may still exist. I've never been shown it. I'm not sure if it does or in fact where it might be. In another town, again, this is not where tourists go. One sees a statue of one of the leaders, Cecilio Chi, on the left in this town of Tepic, and on the right where he is supposedly buried. And in the town that I'm working in Teosuco, one can see again on the left here the church that was in fact destroyed in 1866 by the Maya people as they besieged the town, as they were trying to get rid of the Yucatecos, the non-Maya people. They were besieging this. They besieged it for 3 weeks and eventually blew up the church. And even as they reconstructed the church recently, they decided to keep the end open as a reminder of the war that we're talking about. And then on the right is Jacinto Pat, one of the first leaders of the rebellion that lived outside of Teosuco. We have to think about this as a massive war. This is not just a series of skirmishes or besiegements. This was a massive war that moved huge armies, killed hundreds of thousands of people over a 50-year period, continues to cause grief and difficulty within this region. And here we have a representation of that war from this 1847 time period. You can see some of the photographs from 1901 of the armies that were coming together on the left, and on the right, and some of the leaders of the Mexican army that finally finished and forced the Maya to sign a treaty in 1901. The person who signed that treaty has actually been discredited within the communities today, so in fact that treaty really doesn't exist in the minds of most of the people in this region. And you can see one of the major churches in the town of Chan Santa Cruz, or Felipe, now called Felipe Carrillo Puerto, on the left, and then what it looks like today on the right. But most importantly, this is just a section of the Yucatan as you look around, and you can begin to see, oops, I got it. You can begin to see that this is Teosuco, where we are working now, and various towns, but in fact, all of these communities are part of the sacred landscape that existed in the past for the Maya people, exists for the Maya people today as a sacred landscape, where there are sacred community centers. And this is just one part of the beginning of this rebellion, and the rebellion swept across this entire region all the way up and encompassed all of the Yucatan. This, within the Caste War Museum, are some of the representations as they see their heritage, as the Maya see their heritage of the leaders of this caste war. And in fact, in one of the rooms are all the materials or artifacts that the community has brought together to, in some sense, say these are the things that are important to us. It's not what you represent, it's what, in fact, we have brought together. And that includes a bust of Bernardino Ken, one of the last major leaders of the rebellion, and in fact, his skull. And in fact, his skull had been taken from where he was killed in a place called Xuxub in northeastern part of the Yucatan. It had been taken in the 19th century up to Merida to prove that he had been killed. It sat there until late 1990s, where it was identified and then brought back. And when it was brought back with great ceremony, because this, in fact, is one of the great leaders that the people of Teosuco and the people of the region identify as their heritage. I don't know what that A represents. We haven't figured that out. But on the back of it is inscribed the fact that this is the skull of Bernardino Ken killed and the date that he was killed. And so part of what we're doing is we're working in the town of Teosuco. But what's been interesting is that the town of Teosuco, the people there that are not on this tourist route to Chichen Itza, that are not part of the Cancun tourist trade up and down the east coast of the Yucatan, they have identified a heritage of this caste war, and on their lands, on their ejido lands, they have been protecting for the last 150 years an abandoned town that probably had 3,000 people in 1847 called Tela, although it had the name recently of Lalca, which is just, it's called the place of thistles. It was a name that, because they didn't really know what the original name was, but also Coulompeach. And this is where the memory comes in, because Coulompeach was in fact the name of, and is the remains of the hacienda of Jacinto Pat, one of the original leaders of the caste war. And over a period of time, they finally, after many, many times of visiting and making friends within this town and not knowing that there was anything out in the jungle, these three individuals here, Eladio Mupat on the left, Carlos Chana Espinosa in the middle, and Freddy Balam on the right, invited me to come look at and visit these sites out in the jungle that they had been protecting for 150 years, that are slowly falling apart, and asking me really two things. Number one, can we protect these? Can we continue to protect these over a period of time? And then number two, is there some way that we can figure out how we can create some economic development around this heritage, around this community heritage? Because what they believe right now is that, in fact, their towns are beginning to die, because young people are going off to Cancun, going off to Chichen Itza to work within the tourist trade and not coming home. So what we've begun to do is to look at the hacienda of Jacinto Pat, a drawing here which is not, we don't have a photograph of him or a drawing. This is of some of his descendants, in fact, that live within the community. And this is his house. This is the hacienda of Jacinto Pat. It doesn't look like much, but it's a large building with a series of outlying buildings, about 5 or 6 of them. But this, even though this region had been abandoned for 75 years, between roughly 1870 and 1930s, 1935, even though it had been completely abandoned, reoccupied by different people coming in, this being the town the hacienda of Coulompeach was remembered. It was part of their memory. It was part of their memory on the landscape. This is the entrance to that hacienda, and right next to it we in fact have a walking entrance, but those round things coming out clearly were built later to protect people standing there, and the person standing there was able to guard the entrance to Coulompeach, guard the entrance to this hacienda, which was the center of this rebellion. We also have the town of Tela, and this is just a map of it as we look at it. We are mapping it out in the jungle with the town of Teosuco. This is what all of those are roads, all of those are stone walls that mark the interior of this abandoned community. And there are some of the buildings that are there, this large building, and then a church that's still an active church, only used one day a year by the town of Teosuco during a festival, but still an active church, really quite large, with beautiful murals in the back and an active altar. Taking kids out there to talk about their heritage. I'm taking them usually with Carlos Chana Espinosa and Eladio Mupat to discuss their past. Also elders of the community coming out and talking about what they remember of this early time period. And this is really the central committee, of the co-authors of this paper, as we're talking about the preservation of this site. We also see things like this, just a stone wall, but it turns out that this, in fact, was a roadblock. And if you look carefully, you can see a series of roadblocks in this painting. These things are active. This is, although it looks very passive out in the jungle, just a stone, this was an active part of that landscape. We've also found a census from 1832 that gives us a sense of the size. In 1832, about 2,500 inhabitants. By the time it's 1847, we're estimating upwards of 3,000 to 3,200 inhabitants, today completely abandoned. Nearby, to the southeast, is also a small fort that protected this region, but actually protected a road coming in, protected in some sense, but at the same time controlled by the government. Controlled in terms of the movement of arms, the movement of other types of things across borders. And this is just part of this 1 week's work group as we were going out. The authors of this paper that are in this group, as are students from University of Pennsylvania, University of California, and other members of the Teosuco community. Spending a huge amount of time talking. This is not an archaeological project, this is a community development project. And so the amount of time talking is endless. But this is, in fact, how communication works, I think, in a project like this. And trying to also work with Carlos Chana Espinosa on the left, one of my team members, Suzanne Abel, who's working specifically within the museum, and also an individual, Julio Hoyo Gutierrez, on the right, who is a Maya from a neighboring town, getting his PhD in Mexico, but also working as an archivist for our project and trying to identify material records. And then also looking at the broader landscape of going to Chichen Itza with this community to talk about the type of tourism, not to look at heritage, but to look at tourism, to get an understanding of what 1.5 million tourists can do to a community. Clearly, that's not what they want in Teasuco. And then just to remember that this is the heritage, this is the landscape of violence that surrounds this community. It's landscape and heritage from 1847, but it's continuing to be the landscape and heritage of 2012 as this community is trying to identify how it fits into this landscape, both from a 2012 perspective in terms of economic development, but also how it maintains its rebellious nature. It is rebellious, it wants to be rebellious, and it wants to control its own future. And this, in some sense, I think is why it took upwards between 2 or 3 years before the community invited me out to look at some of these sites, because they are protecting them and they don't want to give these up. Even though by law the government of Mexico could control these sites, when they did try to do some work at these sites, they were kicked out. So this is a region where, in fact, people are trying to control their own heritage, identifying the landscape around them, which is a landscape, as I say, of both violence, of contention. Mexico would never put this up in any shape or form in terms of a World Heritage Site. Mexico denies, in some sense, the existence of these types of sites, denies the existence of the rebellious nature of this community, but at the same time will not walk into this community. So the future of Teasuco is to think about both preservation, maintenance of these landscapes, but at the same time trying to understand how this community can fit into the 2012 system for economic development. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Richard, for that fascinating talk.